The taxi pulled up to the two-story house with blue shutters. Lisa paid the driver, grabbed her 2 suitcases from the trunk, and stood for a moment looking at the home she hadn't seen in 3 months. The garden looked different. Her rose bushes were trimmed in a way she never would have done, and there were new wind chimes hanging from the porch that tinkled softly in the afternoon breeze. 3 months is a long time, she whispered to herself, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She hadn't told anyone she was coming home today. The plan was to surprise Richard, her husband of 8 years. They needed this surprise, this fresh start. Things hadn't been good before she left. Too many silent dinners, too many nights sleeping with their backs to each other. The trip was supposed to help her clear her head, figure out what she really wanted. And after spending time alone in little cafes in Italy, walking the beaches of Greece, and wandering through small towns in Spain, Lisa finally knew. She wanted her marriage. She wanted Richard. She noticed her mother's old red car parked in the driveway. Lisa smiled. Of course, Mum would check on Richard while she was gone. Helen had always been like that, always helping, sometimes a bit too much. But Lisa was grateful that Richard hadn't been completely alone. Pulling her suitcases up the walkway, Lisa felt nervous, like a teenager on a first date. Would Richard be happy to see her? Would he have missed her as much as she had missed him? She hadn't been good about staying in touch during her trip. At first, it was because she needed space. Later, it was because she wanted her return to feel like a fresh beginning. The key still worked. Lisa pushed open the front door as quietly as she could, wanting to maximize the surprise. The house smelled different, a mix of her mother's perfume and something cooking in the kitchen. Had her mum been staying over? Richard? She called out. No answer. Lisa left her suitcases by the door and walked through the living room. Things were out of place. The blanket she had crocheted was folded differently. The photos on the mantel had been rearranged. Her mother's reading glasses sat on the coffee table next to a half-finished crossword puzzle. In the kitchen, Lisa found more signs of her mother. A special tea that only Helen drank was sitting on the counter. There were 2 coffee cups in the sink. And stuck to the fridge with a magnet was a shopping list in Helen's handwriting. Pick up dry cleaning, dog food, Richard's medicine. This was strange. Why would her mother be doing all the shopping? And since when did Richard need medicine? Was he sick? Had something happened while she was away? Lisa heard a laugh coming from upstairs, her mother's laugh. Then Richard's voice, though she couldn't make out the words. They were both home. She climbed the stairs slowly, her heart beating faster with each step. Maybe they were planning something. Her birthday was next month. Could they be discussing a surprise party? As she reached the top landing, Lisa heard her mother say, "I never thought I could feel this way again, not after all these years." Lisa froze. What did that mean? "I know," came Richard's reply, his voice soft and warm in a way Lisa hadn't heard in years. "It just happened so naturally, I didn't even realize until." Lisa's hand moved to her chest. She couldn't breathe right. She took the final few steps toward their bedroom door, which was cracked open just enough for her to see inside. There sat Richard and her mother on the edge of the bed. They weren't touching, but they were close, too close, looking at what appeared to be an old photo album. The way they leaned toward each other, the smiles on their faces, the comfortable silence between them. It was the kind of closeness Lisa and Richard hadn't shared in a long time. Before she could stop herself, Lisa pushed the door open. It swung back and hit the wall with a bang. 2 heads snapped up in surprise. "Lisa," Richard gasped. Her mother's face went pale. "Honey, you're home." Lisa stood in the doorway, her whole body shaking. "Yes," she managed to say. "I'm home." The photo album slipped from between them and fell to the floor with a thud that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent house. For what felt like forever, nobody spoke. Lisa's suitcases sat forgotten downstairs as the 3 of them stared at each other. Richard was the first to break the silence. "You didn't call," he said, his voice caught between happiness and something else. "Guilt, maybe? We had no idea you were coming home today." Lisa's mother stood up quickly, smoothing down her dress. "I should put on some coffee," Helen said, trying to slip past her daughter. "Don't," Lisa said, putting up her hand. "Just don't leave. I want to understand what's going on here." Richard picked up the photo album from the floor. Your mom was just showing me some old family pictures, ones I hadn't seen before. Lisa stepped into the room looking around. Her side of the closet was partly empty, with her mother's clothes hanging where Lisa's dresses used to be. On the nightstand, where Lisa kept her books, sat her mother's reading glasses and a romance novel. "Why are your clothes in my closet?" she asked Helen. Her mother and Richard exchanged a look that made Lisa's stomach turn. "I've been helping out," Helen said carefully. "Richard needed some support after you left." "Left? I didn't leave. I went on a trip. A trip we both agreed I needed." Lisa turned to Richard. "You said you understood." Richard ran his hand through his hair. 3 months, Lisa. 3 months with barely any calls or messages. What was I supposed to think?" Lisa felt her cheeks burn. Yes, she had been distant, trying to sort out her feelings, but she never thought they'd see it as abandonment. "So you moved my mother in?" "It wasn't like that," Richard said. "At first she just came by to check on me. Then one night it was raining too hard for her to drive home. Then another night she cooked dinner and it got late." Helen nodded. "I was worried about him, honey. He wasn't eating right. The house was a mess. He seemed so lost." Lisa walked over to her dresser. Her perfumes and jewelry box were pushed to one side, making room for her mother's things. Even her wedding photo had been moved to make space for a picture of Richard and Helen at what looked like a community picnic. They were smiling, comfortable, happy. "How long has this been going on?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Going on?" Richard echoed. "Nothing's going on. Your mother has been a good friend when I needed one." "A friend who sleeps where, exactly?" Lisa asked, looking at the bed they once shared. Helen stepped forward. "Now that's not fair." "I've been using the guest room." Lisa turned to the window, trying to gather her thoughts. Outside, she noticed the bird feeder she'd always wanted to put up but never got around to. Someone had finally done it, her mother probably. "I've missed 3 months," Lisa said slowly. "And in that time, you two have—" "What? Become roommates? Best friends?" Richard stood up. "You were gone, Lisa. You left with barely an explanation, sending postcards that said nothing real. What did you expect me to do? Not replace me with my mother?" Lisa's voice broke. "I wasn't replacing you," Richard said, coming closer but stopping when Lisa stepped back. "Helen was just here, and I was alone, and—" "And what?" Lisa asked. Helen cleared her throat. "We've become close, that's all. Richard needed someone to talk to. He was hurting." Lisa looked at her mother. "And you just stepped right in, didn't you? Like you've always wanted to." "That's not fair," Helen said. "No. Then why is your special tea in my kitchen? Why are your clothes in my closet? Why are you writing shopping lists that include my husband's medicine?" Richard looked down. "I started having trouble sleeping after you left. The doctor gave me something. Your mom's been making sure I take it." Lisa felt tears forming. "I came back thinking we could start fresh, that we could fix what was broken. But it looks like you found someone else to fix it for you." "Lisa," Richard said, reaching for her hand. She pulled away. "I need some air. I need to think." "Where are you going?" Helen asked, concern in her voice. Lisa walked to the door. "Don't worry, Mom. I'm not leaving for 3 months this time. But I can't stay here tonight. Not with whatever this is." As Lisa walked down the stairs, she heard them following, heard them calling her name. But she kept going, past her unopened suitcases, through the front door that now felt like it belonged to strangers. Outside, in the fading afternoon light, she looked back at the house. Through the window, she could see Richard and her mother standing close, talking intently. They looked like they belonged together. And Lisa had never felt more alone. Lisa drove aimlessly through the streets of her neighborhood, past the park where she and Richard had their first kiss, past the coffee shop where they used to spend Sunday mornings. Everything looked the same, yet everything had changed. She finally stopped at the Sweet Dreams Motel on the edge of town. The woman at the front desk barely looked up as Lisa paid for a room with the emergency credit card she kept in her wallet. "Just for tonight," Lisa said, more to herself than to the desk clerk. The room was small and smelled of old cigarettes despite the no smoking sign on the door. Lisa sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone. 12 missed calls, 5 from Richard, 7 from her mother. No messages. What could they possibly say in a text? Just as she was about to turn off her phone, it rang again. Richard. Hello, she answered, her voice flat. Lisa, please come home. We need to talk about this like adults. Like adults? Is that what you and my mother have been doing? Acting like adults? Richard sighed heavily. You're jumping to conclusions. Nothing happened between me and Helen, not what you're thinking. Then what, Richard? What exactly has been happening in my house while I was gone? There was a pause. Your mother helped me through a rough time. That's all. By moving in? By taking my place. Lisa's voice cracked. She didn't take your place. You left it empty. The words stung like a slap. I needed time. And I needed someone who was actually here. Richard's voice rose, then quickly softened. I'm sorry, that wasn't fair. But Lisa, when you stopped calling, stopped answering my messages, I thought you weren't coming back. Lisa closed her eyes, remembering those last weeks before her trip. The fights. The silence. The way Richard looked at her like she was a stranger. So you replaced me with my mother? It wasn't like that. Helen came by to pick up some mail for you. She saw the state I was in, not eating, not sleeping. She made dinner. We talked. It was nice to talk to someone who actually listened. I listen, Lisa protested weakly. Not for a long time, you haven't. Before Lisa could respond, she heard a knock on Richard's end of the call. Your mom wants to talk to you, Richard said after a moment. I don't want to talk to her right now. Lisa, please. But Lisa had already ended the call. She threw the phone on the bed and walked to the small bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. In the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. 3 months of European sun had tanned her skin, and she'd cut her hair shorter during her trip. She looked different. Maybe she was different. Her phone rang again. Her mother this time. After 4 rings, Lisa picked up but said nothing. Lisa? Are you there? Helen's voice sounded smaller than usual. I'm here. Honey, I know how this looks, but you have to believe me. Did you sleep with him? Lisa cut in. What? No. How could you think that? He's your husband. I'm your mother. Then why are your clothes in my closet? Why have you taken over my house? Helen was quiet for a moment. Richard was in a bad place when you left. Worse than you know. I was worried about him. So worried you moved in. It just happened gradually. I'd stay late, then overnight. Then it seemed easier to bring some things over. Lisa felt tears welling up. Did either of you ever think about how I'd feel coming home to this? Honestly, we didn't know if you were coming home. The words hung in the air between them. I'd always planned to come back, Lisa whispered. You didn't tell us that. You barely told us anything. Helen's voice grew stronger. Do you know what it's like to watch someone you love spiral downward? Richard wasn't eating. He wasn't sleeping. I found him one night sitting in the dark, looking at your wedding photos and crying. Lisa hadn't known. She hadn't let herself think about what her absence might do to him. I didn't know, she admitted. No, you didn't, because you were too busy finding yourself to think about the people you left behind. Helen's voice had an edge Lisa had rarely heard. I love you, but what you did was selfish. Lisa's hand tightened around the phone, and moving into my house, taking my place at my table, in my kitchen, that wasn't selfish. I was trying to help. Well, you can stop helping now. I'm back. And how long will you stay this time? Helen asked quietly. Lisa had no answer for that. She ended the call and sat in the gathering darkness of the motel room, wondering the same thing herself. Lisa barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Richard and her mother sitting together on the bed, looking through that photo album. What photos were they looking at? Old family pictures? Wedding memories? The honeymoon that now felt like it happened to different people? Morning light filtered through the thin motel curtains. Lisa checked her phone. 3 more missed calls from Richard, none from her mother. There was a text from Richard. Please come home. We need to talk face to face. Home. Was it still her home? Lisa showered and put on yesterday's clothes. She needed her suitcases, which meant she needed to go back to the house. As she drove, memories flooded back. The months before her trip had been so hard. She and Richard had stopped talking about anything real. They'd become experts at avoiding each other, him working late, her taking on extra projects. When they did talk, it turned into arguments about bills, chores, and the fact that neither of them seemed happy anymore. Maybe we need some time apart, Lisa had suggested one night after a particularly bad fight. Richard had looked at her with tired eyes. Maybe we do. She hadn't meant to be gone for 3 months. It was supposed to be a 2-week trip to visit her college friend in Spain. But then her friend suggested Italy, and in Italy she met a group of women traveling through Greece. The trip stretched on, and with each passing day, it became harder to call Richard. What would she say? That she was having the time of her life while he was at home alone. That for the first time in years, she felt like herself again. So she sent postcards instead, short notes that said nothing real. Enjoying Barcelona. Weather is nice. Visited the Colosseum today. Thinking of you. Empty words that did nothing to bridge the growing gap between them. Lisa pulled into the driveway of her house. Richard's car was gone, but her mother's was still there. She sat in her car for a long moment, gathering courage. Helen opened the door before Lisa could knock. She looked like she hadn't slept either. He's at work, Helen said. He didn't want to go, but I told him it might be good to give you some space. Lisa nodded and walked past her mother into the house. In daylight, the changes were even more obvious. Little touches of her mother were everywhere. Different throw pillows on the couch, new curtains in the living room, plants that Lisa could never keep alive thriving on the windowsill. Your suitcases are still by the door, Helen said, hovering nearby. I didn't know if you wanted them upstairs or... I don't know what I want, Lisa admitted. They stood in awkward silence until Helen motioned to the kitchen. Coffee? Lisa followed her mother, watching as Helen moved confidently around the kitchen, knowing exactly where everything was, reaching automatically for Richard's favorite mug. How long have you been staying here? Lisa asked as her mother handed her a cup. Helen sat at the kitchen table. About 2 months. Every day. Helen nodded. It happened gradually. First, I was just checking in. Then I started bringing over meals. Then one night it was storming and Richard asked me to stay. She looked down at her coffee. He was having panic attacks, Lisa. Did you know he's had them before? Lisa shook her head. He never told me. They started again after you left. The first bad one happened about 3 weeks after you were gone. He called me in the middle of the night, couldn't breathe. I rushed over and found him curled up on your bedroom floor. Lisa felt a stab of guilt. I didn't know. How could you? You weren't here. Helen's words weren't accusatory, just matter of fact. After that, I started staying over more. It seemed to help him to not be alone. Lisa looked around the kitchen, seeing signs of a routine she wasn't part of. A calendar on the fridge with doctor's appointments, a pill organizer on the counter. When did it change? She asked quietly. When did helping him turn into whatever I walked in on yesterday? Helen looked up sharply. Nothing inappropriate happened between us, if that's what you're asking. Then what did I see yesterday? Because it looked like something more than a son-in-law and his mother-in-law. Helen was quiet for a long moment. I don't know what to call it, she finally said. Friendship. Companionship. All I know is that we were both lonely, both hurting, and somehow being together made it hurt less. Lisa felt tears form. And where does that leave me? Helen reached across the table and tried to take Lisa's hand, but Lisa pulled away. You still belong here, Helen said. This is your home, your husband. Is it? Because it looks like you've made yourself pretty comfortable in my place. Lisa stood up and walked to the sink, staring out the window at the backyard. The vegetable garden she had always talked about planting was now there, neat rows of tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. Did you plant that garden? She asked. Helen nodded. Richard mentioned you always wanted one. We started it about a month ago. He works on it every evening after dinner. Every new detail was another small cut. While Lisa was finding herself abroad, her mother and husband were building a life together, planting gardens, hanging bird feeders, going to doctor's appointments. I'm going to get my things, Lisa said abruptly. She walked upstairs to the master bedroom and began gathering toiletries and clothes. On Richard's nightstand, she noticed a book, a collection of poetry they had bought together on their 5th anniversary. It was bookmarked. She opened it to find a page with a poem about forgiveness, certain lines underlined in Richard's careful handwriting. The sound of a car in the driveway made her look out the window. Richard was home early from work. Lisa heard the front door open, heard the low murmur of voices downstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed waiting. Richard appeared in the doorway, still in his work clothes, his face drawn with fatigue and worry. "You came back," he said. "Just for my things." Richard nodded as if he'd expected this. He walked in and sat beside her, leaving a careful space between them. "I need to explain about yesterday," he began. "Mom already told me about your panic attacks." Richard looked down at his hands. "It's not just that. When you left," he stopped, corrected himself. "When you went on your trip, I was in a bad place. Worse than I've been in a long time. You could have told me." "How? You weren't answering my calls. Your postcard said nothing real." He looked at her directly now. "Do you know how it feels to get a card that says weather is nice from the person you've shared your life with for 8 years?" Lisa felt the shame rise in her cheeks. I didn't know what to say. The truth would have been a start, that you weren't sure about us anymore, that you needed space, that you were happier there than here. His words hung in the air between them. "Your mother filled the silence," Lisa said quietly. Richard nodded. "She did. She came by that first month just to check on me. Then she started bringing food, staying to talk. She listened, Lisa. About everything, my job, my fears, my feelings about us. Things you used to talk to me about. Things I tried to talk to you about. But somewhere along the way, we stopped hearing each other." Lisa knew he was right. When had they stopped really listening? A year ago? 2? "Yesterday," she said, "when I saw you together with that photo album." Richard reached for the book on his nightstand and handed it to her. It wasn't a photo album at all, but a scrapbook. Inside were photos of Lisa and Richard throughout their relationship, along with ticket stubs, dried flowers, and notes they had written to each other. "Your mom found this in the attic. She thought it might help me remember why we got married in the first place." Lisa flipped through the pages. Their first date to the county fair, the weekend trip to the mountains, their wedding day. So many happy moments preserved. "I don't understand," she said. "If you were looking at our memories, why did you both look so close?" Richard sighed. "Because your mother was telling me not to give up on us. She was saying how much you've always loved me, even when you were difficult." Her words, not mine. A small smile touched his lips. "She was on your side, Lisa. Even when I was angry and hurt, she kept reminding me of all the reasons to keep fighting for our marriage." Lisa felt tears forming. "So you and my mother aren't?" "No," Richard said firmly. "God, no. She's been a friend, a good one, but that's all." "Then why is half her wardrobe in my closet? Why is she living here?" Richard ran a hand through his hair. "Because I was scared to be alone, because the silence in this house was killing me, because when the panic attack started, having someone else here was the only thing that helped." A car horn honked outside. Lisa went to the window and saw her mother loading suitcases into her car. "What is she doing?" she asked. Richard joined her at the window. "She said this morning that if you came back, she would go, that it was always temporary." Lisa watched her mother struggling with a heavy bag. "Just like that? She's leaving?" "She said it was time. That her job was done." "And what job was that?" Richard looked at her with tired eyes. "Keeping me alive until you came home." Lisa stood frozen by the window, the weight of Richard's words sinking in. "Keeping you alive? What does that mean?" Richard turned away, his shoulders tense. "There was a night, about a month after you left. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I kept calling your phone, but it went straight to voicemail." He paused, his voice growing quieter. "I found myself staring at a bottle of sleeping pills, thinking how easy it would be to just stop feeling so empty." Lisa's hand flew to her mouth. "Richard." "I didn't do anything," he quickly added. "I called your mom instead. She came over right away, stayed up all night talking with me. After that, she just never really left." Outside, Helen was still loading her car. Lisa watched her mother, a woman who had always been too involved in her life, too quick with advice, too ready to step in. But now, seeing her through this new lens, Lisa felt her anger giving way to something more complicated. "I need to talk to her," Lisa said, heading for the stairs. By the time she got outside, Helen had closed her trunk and was opening the driver's door. "Mom, wait," Lisa called. Helen turned, her face guarded. "I think it's best if I go, honey. You and Richard need time alone." "Why didn't you tell me how bad it was? Why didn't you make me come home?" Helen leaned against her car. "Would you have listened? You were so determined to have your space." "But if I'd known he was thinking about," Lisa couldn't finish the sentence. "That's exactly why he didn't want me to tell you. He didn't want you to come back out of pity or guilt." Helen sighed. "He wanted you to come back because you wanted to, not because you had to." Lisa looked back at the house, where Richard stood watching from the bedroom window. "I thought something was going on between you two," Lisa admitted, "when I saw you sitting so close, looking at that scrapbook." "Oh, Lisa." Helen shook her head. "He's my son-in-law. Yes, I care about him, but not like that. Never like that." "Then why did it look like you were moving in? Your clothes, your things everywhere." "Because I was scared to leave him alone," Helen said simply. "There were bad days, really bad days. Days when he wouldn't get out of bed, wouldn't eat unless I made him. The doctor said someone should stay with him until the medication started working." Lisa felt each word like a blow. While she had been taking selfies at the Colosseum, her husband had been fighting to get out of bed. "The Garden," Lisa said suddenly. "The bird feeder, those were your ideas." Helen shook her head. "They were his. The therapist suggested projects to focus on, things to look forward to. Richard remembered how you always talked about wanting a garden. The bird feeder was because you love cardinals. Everything he did these past 3 months was about bringing pieces of you back home." Lisa felt tears streaming down her face. "All this time, I thought I was the one who needed space, who needed to find myself. But I was just running away, wasn't I?" Helen took a step toward her daughter. "We all run sometimes, Lisa. The question is whether we keep running or find the courage to come back." "I don't know if he can forgive me," Lisa whispered. "That's something you'll have to figure out together." Helen opened her car door. "I should go. This is between you two now." "Mom," Lisa said, stopping her. "Thank you for being here when I wasn't." Helen's eyes filled with tears. "He's family. You both are." She got into her car. "Call me when you're ready, not before." As her mother's car pulled away, Lisa turned back toward the house. Richard was no longer at the window. She found him in the kitchen, making tea, her favorite kind, that she was surprised to find still in the cupboard. He'd handed her a cup without a word, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "I don't know where to start," Lisa said. Richard looked at her, his eyes tired but clear. "Maybe we start by being honest. No more postcards with nice weather. No more pretending everything's fine when it's not." "I'm not the same person who left," Lisa warned him. "I'm not the same person you left either," he replied. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd shared thousands of meals, celebrated birthdays, paid bills, and had countless conversations, important ones and forgotten ones. "So," Lisa said, wrapping her hands around the warm cup, "where do we go from here?" Richard turned his teacup slowly, thinking. "I've spent 3 months imagining what I'd say if you came back. Now that you're here, I don't know where to begin." "Tell me what you want," Lisa said. "Just be honest." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "I want to know if you came back for me or because your trip ended." The question hung in the air between them. Outside, evening was falling, soft shadows filling the kitchen they once shared so comfortably. "I came back because of us," Lisa finally said. "The longer I was away, the more I realized I was running from problems instead of facing them." "But you stayed away," Richard said. "You could have come back any time." Lisa nodded. "I was afraid. Afraid you wouldn't want me back. Afraid we were already too broken." She reached across the table, not quite touching his hand. "But I never stopped loving you, even when I couldn't say it." Richard was quiet for a long moment. "There were days I hated you," he admitted. "Days I wanted to pack up your things and mail them to wherever you were. But your mom kept saying I should wait, that you'd find your way back when you were ready. She had more faith in me than I deserved. She knows you better than you think." They sat in silence, the distance between them both physical and emotional. 3 months of separate lives, separate pains. "I saw a therapist in Italy," Lisa said suddenly. "An American woman living in Rome. I found her card in a coffee shop and called on impulse. She took a deep breath. She helped me see how I've been running my whole life. From hard conversations, from real intimacy, even from myself. Richard looked surprised. You never told me. I'm telling you now. She made me see that this trip wasn't about finding myself. It was about hiding from the person I was afraid I'd become, someone who couldn't make her marriage work, who was following her mother's pattern of failed relationships. Your mother and I talked about that, Richard said, about how hard marriage was for her, how she never found someone who stayed. She was always so critical of my choices of view of us. I think I went on this trip partly to prove her wrong, to show her I could be independent, that I didn't need her advice. Lisa laughed softly. And then you two became allies while I was gone. Life has a strange sense of humor. Richard's expression softened. She loves you, Lisa. Everything she did here was to give us a chance to fix things. Lisa nodded, tears threatening again. I know that now. Richard stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden they had planned together but never planted. So where do we go from here? He echoed her earlier question. Lisa joined him at the window. I don't think we can just pick up where we left off. No, he agreed. Too much has happened. We could start over, she suggested. Not forget everything, but begin again, knowing what we know now. Richard turned to face her. And what do we know now? I know that running away doesn't solve anything. That silence is more dangerous than fighting. That love isn't just feeling happy together, it's choosing each other even when it's hard. And I know that I need to be honest about my struggles, Richard said. That keeping things inside nearly destroyed me. That asking for help isn't weakness. Lisa tentatively reached for his hand, and this time he didn't pull away. Maybe we start small, she said. Dinner together. Conversations that don't avoid the hard parts. Getting to know each other again. I'd like that, Richard said. His fingers tightened around hers. The guest room is made up. Your mom's been sleeping there, but the sheets are clean. Lisa understood what he was offering. Space, time, a chance to rebuild without rushing. Thank you. As darkness fell outside, they began the careful work of making dinner together in their kitchen. There were awkward moments, reaching for the same spoon, not knowing who should do what. But there were small smiles too, fragments of the ease they once shared. Later that night, Lisa called her mother. We're trying, she said simply when Helen answered. That's all any of us can do, her mother replied. As Lisa lay in the guest room that night, looking at the ceiling she'd never noticed before, she thought about the long road ahead. Rebuilding trust. Learning to communicate. Forgiving, not just Richard and her mother, but herself too. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, Lisa felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope.